This program is brought to you by Emory University.
It's hard to understate the significance of what has happened here. Just a few weeks ago, it would have been unimaginable for Tunisians to gather like this in front of the headquarters of the ruling party.
Freedom, and we're going to take our freedom.
They charged through from the pro-regime side directly into the opposition, flogging people as they went.
President Mohamed Hosni Mubarak has decided to step down as president of Egypt.
There's young, there's old, there's people from all walks of life. Everybody's celebrating.
Eyewitnesses say they had no warning the crackdown was coming. The government says they did. State TV shows weapons they claim were found at the camp. It's raising a normally unspoken question of loyalty to the mostly Shia Muslim protesters, who are the majority here and are demanding better rights from their Sunni rulers.
We're in the old part of Damascus here, right next to the Umayyad Mosque, and we're starting to hear chanting. Now, a bit earlier, men were streaming out of the mosque. It was a calm scene. But right now, we're starting to hear slogans chanted in the distance, and I can tell right away that this is a pro-government, spontaneous or not, pro-government demonstration.
This was how it all ended for Muammar Gaddafi. Cornered and injured, the former dictator was apparently trying to escape Sirte. He appears bloody but alive here, but died soon afterwards, according to NTC officials.
We are so happy.
Many of the people here have known nothing other than Colonel Gaddafi's 42-year rule. They cannot believe now that finally he is dead, that Sirte has fallen and the war is over. Just look at the sea of flags out here in celebration.
I'm here at the party headquarters of Ennahda, where, as you can see, the victory celebrations are already underway.
Beautiful.
It will not change in 1 month or a year or 5 years. It will take a long time.
They lined up early on a bright and crisp Cairo morning.
After months of promising to step down, then backtracking, Yemen's injured President Ali Abdullah Saleh says he wants to come to the U.S. for a while. But for Saleh's political opposition, it feels like deja vu. One more attempt by Yemen's strong-armed leader of 33 years to stay in power that's ignited a national uprising and a bloody crackdown.
They've been bombarding an area in Homs called Khadi for like 3 hours. They've been bombarding with mortar bombs and tank shells.
Good evening. Welcome to CNN Dialogues. My name is Doug Shipman. I am the CEO of the National Center for Civil and Human Rights, and I am also glad to be back on campus where I'm a proud Emory College alumni. When Dr. Rudolph Byrd came to my office to first discuss a vision for what would become CNN Dialogues, we talked about a series of events that would bring together national and international individuals who were talking about the most relevant issues of the day. This CNN Dialogue, on the campus in which he spent so much of his academic life, would be the epitome and will be the epitome of what was envisioned on that day. The James Weldon Johnson Institute was founded on the belief that the civil rights movement is an ongoing struggle for human rights. The National Center for Civil and Human Rights is an institution dedicated to having civil dialogue on complex and relevant issues of social justice. Both of our missions tonight will be fulfilled. This panel that has been assembled will be bringing honest, forthright, and insightful comments on what has happened and what is happening across countries and societies. I would ask each of you to engage in this discussion by being honest about your perceptions of what you think you know about the region, the people, the religion, and the issues, and then compare those to what you're hearing from people who have been on the front lines in these places. Tonight, you also have an opportunity to be part of the virtual dialogue. I would encourage you to tweet, Facebook, or other social media using the hashtag CNN Dialogues, and also to follow the Twitter stream at CNN Dialogues. We are very honored tonight to have with us, as a host and a moderator, someone who knows these issues firsthand extremely well. Hala Garani is an anchor and correspondent for CNN International. She has reported from every country in the Middle East, including Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Israel, Jordan, and the Palestinian territories. This past June, she was part of a small team of journalists allowed into Syria for the first time since the protests began to cover the situation there. She previously reported extensively from Jordan and Egypt and has been instrumental in CNN's coverage of the uprisings in the Arab world. She will introduce a panel tonight who will provide us a dialogue around what is happening and where we are going in these regions. Hannah, please.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming to this CNN Dialogues on the Arab Spring, as it's been called. And of course, we've used many other names of many other seasons in the year to describe where we might be in this process and these revolutions that have so fundamentally already changed this region. Every country has been different. It started in Tunisia, it spread to Egypt, it then went on to Yemen, to Libya, and now to Syria, where day in and day out we are seeing images of death, destruction, and despair. Where are we headed is the question we are asking today in the Middle East and the Arab world. We have panelists who are going to join me in just a few seconds who are either activists or thinkers or people who have transformed the Middle East landscape themselves, politicians in some cases, and my own colleague as well, our senior international correspondent, Nick Robertson. Here's a bit of housekeeping to start things off. We are going to have 35 minutes of a panel, just 35 minutes, although we're not going to be too strict about the time, but more or less half an hour to 35 minutes of a panel discussion with the people right here up on this stage. And after that is over, we will open up the floor to audience questions, because I know so many of you want to have an opportunity to engage in this CNN dialogue. That's why we're calling it a dialogue. Thank you again for coming, and I'm going to introduce our panelists now. Ahed El-Hindi, if you could please join us. Ahed El-Hindi is a Syrian dissident in exile. He was imprisoned in Syria. Please have a seat there. Right here. And Ahed, by the way, is the Arabic program director at cyberdissidents.org. Dalia Ziada, if you could join me now as well, who is an Egyptian, who I've had the opportunity of meeting as well in Cairo just a few months ago. Dalia is the director of the American Islamic Congress Egypt office. Dalia, actually, you are right here indeed. And Dalia has amazing perspective because, as you've all followed, I'm sure, there were elections in Egypt over the last several months, and Dalia herself ran for a seat in parliament. We're going to talk to her about that and maybe how underrepresented women are this time around. All right, and let's have Professor Carrie Wickham join me now. Carrie is an associate professor of political science at Emory University, and she's also the author of Mobilizing Islam, Religion, Activism, and Political Change in Egypt. And Carrie, you're also working on a book on the Muslim Brotherhood as well, so it'll be very apropos for our discussion. Lamis Daif, if you could join us now. Lamis is from Bahrain. though she has been outside of Bahrain for the last several months. Yes, active in the opposition movement in Bahrain, a journalist. You've been banned from writing several times in your home country of Bahrain since the start of the revolution because of her participation in some of the opposition movements. Nick Robertson, finally, last but not least, my colleague. Nick is our senior international correspondent at CNN. Nick joined CNN in 1990, and of course he's been involved in the coverage of really pretty much all the big stories of the last 2 decades, including our topic tonight, which is the Arab Spring, the revolutions, and where the region will go next. And he was in Syria just 3 weeks ago and was able to go into some of those hotspot cities, including Homs, I believe in Hama as well, yes? All right, okay, so let's start the discussion. Again, thank you all for coming. Now, what we've done is we are going to start this discussion with a segment, if you like, that we've called the unfinished revolution, because it started last year, a little more than a year ago, but it's certainly not over. And I want to start with Egypt, I think, because that's one of the countries that perhaps best illustrates what a country has to go through in order to achieve, I suppose, in order to reach that end line, that finishing point of the revolution. Dalia, where are we today in Egypt?
Where are we today in Egypt? It's very ambiguous and very vague. We don't know where everything is heading, but what is clear to everyone is that we are facing a new form of dictatorship. It's represented in, Mubarak's dictatorship was what we called autocracy. And through his age, we experienced all the forms of suppression and corruption and lack of order and everything. But what we are facing now, and actually we've been trained on how to face it until finally we were able to bring him down. But what we are facing now is a new type of dictatorship that's more complicated because it's mixing between 2 dictatorship patterns. One is the military dictatorship and the other is the theocratic dictatorship represented in the rising of Islamist groups to power and to politics.
So let me ask you this then. After a year, after having fought, after the deaths in some cases of demonstrators, was it worth it for Egypt?
Of course, definitely it is worth it. It's, I don't regret a single moment of a single action that has been taken since January 25th. I believe we have participated in changing the history of the whole region, if not the whole world, not only Egypt, not only our country. It's worth it because if at least it helped us to break this barrier of fear and to dream of a new future and to have hope without hope in making the change, even if it will take long years. So definitely it works.
Lamis, I have to ask you about Bahrain. I hear many Bahrainis complain that this is a revolution that's going on in their country, or protests at the very least, and nobody seems to be paying as much attention to it as other protests, demonstrations, and revolutions. Is that something that frustrates you, and why do you think that is?
It frustrates me, and it frustrates all Bahrainis. Let me tell you something. We didn't uprise against a regime that the world already hates, like Al-Qaddafi or Al-Assad. There is many countries are waiting. They were waiting for the chance to, take those regimes down. But we faced a regime that it's a big ally to the Americans and to many countries. They have excellent relationship, and it's surrounded with friends. All the regimes of the Gulf, they are supporting each other. So we have a very weak chance of a world support. But yet, knowing all of these equations, we yet uprise because we know that this is our right and we have to work for it.
All right. So you think there's a bit of a double standard then, that because Bahrain is an American ally, maybe there isn't as much attention paid or as many speeches given about the situation in your country?
The double standard is the name of this of the Arab Spring, because though some people are crying for the people of Syria that we fully support, by the way. The same people that crying for Syria, they don't mind that the people in Yemen are dying or the people of Bahrain are suffering. Those double standards it's because of the regimes are making their calculations. Saudi Arabia, for example, don't want Yemen the Yemen revolution to succeed. That's why they are suffocating it like they do to us. But they support, on the other hand, the revolution in Syria or in Tunis.
All right, I believe we can go now to the audience and have Dr. Rashid Naim, who's a political science professor at Georgia State University. Are you here? There you go. Yes, please ask your question, and if you want to direct it to specifically one panelist, go ahead.
Not necessarily to one panel member, but it is concerning Egypt, because I think Egypt is central to everything that happens in the region. What is the possibility of the civilian administration, whatever kind of civilian administration emerges, having real control over the military establishment in Egypt? I think that's the crux of what's going to happen there. So.
All right, Professor, maybe we can pose that question to you then, and that's a concern, by the way. The concern is, how does a true civilian democratic leadership take over in a country like Egypt after decades of dictatorship and military rule?
This is truly the million-dollar question, and for Egypt to make a transition to a civilian government is going to require that new controls be placed on a military that is quite used to operating without public accountability and oversight. And at the moment, negotiations are underway between members of parliament and the military in the hope of working out some sort of arrangement that would be amenable to both sides. At the same time, the protesters in the streets are demanding an immediate transfer of authority to a new civilian government. So the situation is very much unsettled. And it's an open question whether or not the military is going to be willing to defer to civilian authorities on several crucial issues. One is control over military budgets, which have been historically, insulated from public oversight. Second is they are likely to demand some degree of immunity from prosecution for those responsible for the violence and deaths and injuries of protesters, not just during the uprising, but in the year since. And also the military is going to be keenly concerned with maintaining control and insulating from public view its vast financial and economic enterprises that by some estimates constitute as much as 20% of Egyptian GDP. So all of those are issues on which there is likely to be tremendous debate and contestation. One interesting point, though, in this regard is that observers are saying that the Brotherhood, which is the dominant player in parliament, is more willing to work with the military on these issues and address these concerns, whereas those in the streets who are continuing to protest are much less willing. And the calculation on the part of the Brotherhood, many would argue, is that they are afraid of pushing the military too hard and thereby triggering a military backlash that could jeopardize a transfer of power to the parliament. So these are the issues that are underway. Whether or not a new civilian government will be able to establish full civilian control over the military in the short term, I think it's highly unlikely. I think this is going to be an ongoing issue that the new civilian government, both a president and a parliament, will be having to work on for many years to come.
Thank you very much for your question, and we'll be taking, of course, more questions from the audience as well. So if you're interested in directing it to a specific panelist or the panel in general, prepare your questions and we'll do our best to get to you. Ahed El-Hindi, I want to ask you, in the case of Syria, I think we can talk about an unfinished revolution. I mean, we've been 11 months into it, and you can, I'm sure those of you interested in this topic, and you probably are because you're here, have seen on your TV screens the images that remind us sometimes of the Balkans. It reminds us sometimes of the worst types of sieges, what's happening in Homs. how is it going to get much worse before it gets better?
Yeah, I think it's going to get worse from the side of the regime. The brutality is increasing day by day. The regime first started to use like normal weapons, Kalashnikov, to fight, to kill the protesters. Now they're using rockets, they're using tanks. In some area of Homs, they airstrike these areas. People are standing by themselves. It's true. The world are saying and giving verbal statements against Assad, calling us a dictator. We know all that he's a dictator. That's why we marched against him. But the thing is, they're saying nothing. There's nothing more than talking.
Well, there was an attempt to get a resolution passed in the United Nations, and that failed.
The Russian, they vetoed it, and as everybody know. But however, the Russian are supporting Assad with arms, are supplying the army in Syria, and they're saying they are neutral. On the other hand, we have the Free Syrian Army, the defectors. They are left alone. Nobody's supporting them. They're not getting any kind of weapons from anyone.
But that was going to be my question to Nick, because you've met with and spoken with the rebels and those who with light weaponry are trying to resist the onslaught of the regular army. And now we're hearing from John McCain, the U.S. Senator. Maybe we should start thinking about arming these rebels. What impact do you think that would have on the ground in Syria?
It would certainly, as far as the opposition is concerned, make them feel that they did have some support and make them realize that perhaps they can achieve their goals. Right now they feel incredibly let down by the international community. But I remember back to Libya, you can't compare Libya and Syria, it's not like for like. But we were based in Zintan in the Western Mountains, and we were living with the local commander. And I remember him saying to me, he said, I really worry, he was a former general, and he said, I really worry about putting weapons in the hands of all these young men. I'm afraid of what it's going to do to them. It's going to militarize them. I'm afraid that after all this is over, how we'll get the weapons back out of their hands. This guy's now the defense minister, and he's now faced with the problem that there are a myriad of militias across Libya. I think the makeup of Syria is something different, but when you add weapons to a conflict, you can guarantee that the conflict is going to get worse. Do we have a moral obligation to save people from slaughter? I think one of the difficulties or problems, if you want to answer that, can we save these people from slaughter by giving them these weapons? It will be very hard to build a cohesive force that can hold off Gaddafi's regime, Assad's army, because Assad has a very, very strong army, 200,000 people, tanks, armored personnel carriers. It's going to be very hard to build an opposition force that's capable of holding that off. Could they hold off in Bab Amma if they had more weapons, more supplies? They could hold the military back, yes. So would it mean that enclaves could be saved? Yes. Could those enclaves grow into something else? Maybe. Certainly, it's going to be a long and bloody battle, and these weapons will aid that.
And Nick, I'm sure you've heard people have compared Homs to Misrata in Libya, but then people say, sure, there's a Misrata in Syria, but there's no Benghazi. And I think that was what made perhaps Libya possible, and what makes Syria so difficult in terms of a military intervention. I mean, do you agree with that?
Well, I agree. Of course, when you give weapons to any groups, the situation maybe would be in a way worse, but let's not forget that there are a lot of forces, there are a lot of countries that they might support these rebels. What worrying me as a Syrian, as a secular Syrian, that we have Saudi Arabia, that they have an interest in the area, as we have seen in Egypt and Tunisia. They might have support their people on the ground, supplying them with weapons. And who are these people? They are the Islamists, and the country would go into showers. So why I'm saying we need a Western role, American role, European role.
Because you've met with Hillary Clinton, haven't you? And what do you tell her when you meet her?
I mean, at that stage, nobody called for a military intervention. We're wishing to do it peacefully. But what we said, don't go and say publicly, we're not going to interfere in Syria, because this is boosting the confidence of Assad, and he's killing more people. Why his confidence now? He's seeing nobody in the world is willing to stop him.
Yeah. Let me, we're going to move on to the next sort of part of our conversation, which flows perfectly out of this first segment, and that is who is winning and who is losing in these revolutions. First, I'd like to show our audience a clip from reporting that my colleague Jim Clancy did in Egypt just recently. Take a look.
In Cairo, long lines formed outside polling stations exclusively for women.
What's the sense you get about the women that are gathered here and voting today?
It's an awakening. I'm very happy, and I feel that even when I see old ladies hardly voting, it makes me feel that really Egypt is reviving.
Egypt's women are concerned that if Islamists gain a majority in the People's Assembly or lower house, their hopes for a more liberal life will be smothered. Some were voting for the first time in their lives. Others said that while they had cast ballots in the past, this was for them as well, their first truly free vote.
Well, this is perfect for Dalia Ziada. I'm going to start with you. You ran for a seat in Parliament. You were not successful this time around, maybe next time. But you know, I looked at the number of women in this Parliament. 8, right?
Unfortunately, yes.
8 out of 508, I believe.
Yeah, and they did not win because they are independent or they did a good campaign or they are qualified. They won simply because they were on the lists of the Muslim Brotherhood that happened to win the majority of votes.
Okay. So what is the, I mean, let me ask you this then. Should the world, I mean, and those assembled here, look at what happened in these Egyptian elections and say to themselves, this was the expression of the will of the people through the ballot box. I will accept it. But I will hope that it will evolve into something more mature, where those people in Parliament will be held accountable and we will become a more mature democracy. Or should they be concerned?
Yes, I like this term that you used, more mature democracies. This is actually what we've been fighting for from day one. Not only day one of the revolution, but day one of the civil rights movement in Egypt. We are not looking for the plain democracy of going to poll and vote and make some uninformed choice just because someone told you to do so. But we were looking for liberal democracy. And by word liberal, I mean all the great values that comes with democracy, like a strong and solid constitution that respects human rights and civil rights in the country. Everyone should be represented in this parliament and in this democratic system. So we have lived for long years under Mubarak. We had votes, we had elections, and we had what Fareed Zakaria actually calls illiberal democracy. So the hope now is to move to liberal democracy. It will take time and take effort, but eventually we will get there.
Right. Let me go to one of our audience members here, Hainer Sibrian, who is a junior at Georgia State University. He recently visited Egypt with Georgia State's Model Arab League team. I'm interested in hearing from you. We spent a lot of time covering the Arab League. You went with the Model Arab League. What's your question, and would you like to address it to a specific panel?
Thank you, Hala. I actually would like to address this question to Dalia. With the Freedom and Justice Party, which has strong links to the Muslim Brotherhood, and the Salafi al-Nur Party taking a majority of the seats in the Egyptian parliament, what happened to the liberal voices that gave rise to the Arab Spring in the parliamentary elections? And also, why were minorities like the Bedouins, the Copts, and the Egyptian women marginalized in these elections? Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't hear the last part of the question.
Yes, essentially, what is going to be, what is the future in terms of, I suppose what you were asking is as well as the protection of minorities and that kind of thing in a country where the winners of these elections are Muslim Brothers or Salafists and that kind of thing?
Yes, it's actually, thank you very much for this question, and I think it's very relevant to what I was just saying now about this value of liberal democracy that we would like to achieve in Egypt. Now we are seeing Islamists are controlling almost the whole parliament, and even in public decision making, the military is controlling the whole scene. So the civil young liberals who were starting everything from the beginning are now marginalized, either intentionally or unintentionally. But we are not properly represented in the whole process, and I mean by represented being in the decision-making spot, not just counted as numbers. how this will affect the status of civil minorities, of course, I expect it will affect it negatively unless we try to make sure that everyone would be involved in writing the Constitution. And by everyone, I mean starting from the most educated and the most intellectual in the country to the least educated and even the most basic grassroots citizens living there. I'm already working on a project that would serve this purpose. Actually, we're making focus groups with through my organization with people all over Egypt to come up with a list of rights they would like to see in their constitution. So hopefully this somehow...
And I'm sorry to jump in, it's about educating people about what their rights are and what their choices are, yes? I mean, that's going to be...
Not just educating, but we will let them educate us about what they expect to see in the constitution.
Yes.
I think and just to add to what Dalia was saying, it is true that the voices of the revolution were at an organizational disadvantage in these last elections compared to the Muslim Brotherhood, which has a very well-tuned election machine. But nevertheless, we need to keep in mind that secular democratic groups do control about 20% of the seats in Parliament. It's not a large percentage, but they are a very outspoken and passionately committed set of individuals, and they are also backed by these large movements of individuals on the streets who are going to continue to push for protection of personal freedoms, civil and political rights, who are working sort of outside the dome of Parliament and are going to continue to apply pressure on the Parliament in those areas. Mm-hmm. And the other thing I think that we need to guard against is talking about Islamists as if they're all the same, because there are actually important differences between, on one end of the spectrum, the Wasat Party, which are ex-members of the Brotherhood, who have, I think, developed a pretty robust commitment to pluralism, human rights, women's participation, and on the other extreme, of course, the hardline Salafi groups, who are political novices. They're new to Parliament, but have a long tradition of mobilizing at the grassroots level, have a great deal of grassroots support, and in many cases are extremely ultra-conservative and illiberal in their views. And the Muslim Brotherhood, I think we can put somewhere in between, acknowledging at the same time that the Brotherhood itself is a large, heterogeneous umbrella organization that encompasses many points of view and opinions. And the other point I'd like to make about the Brotherhood is that it is just now coming to our attention now that it has won 47% of the seats in Parliament, but it has been active in the political process for a very long time.
Well, it's probably because it has been active that it has achieved such good. But I want to give a chance. I want to give a chance to Ahid, because you wanted to say something about the winners and losers in all of this.
I don't think first what's happening would bring us a magical solution. Like in the next day, we would not woke up to see Republican and Democrats in our country fighting against each other, we have been living decades of oppression, and of course the Islamic, we're seeing the most prominent rivals against this regime, so they got more popularity. However, we have the activists who started this revolution, who steered or fomented this revolution. They are still there, and if there will be any oppression by the Muslim Brotherhood or the Islamic, the activists are still there, so they are not well organized. In Egypt and in the whole Arab world, they are not that.
You think they won't stand for, in the same way they didn't stand for the military coming in and using old practices, you don't think they would stand for them?
They attacked the Muslim Brotherhood recently when the Muslim Brotherhood banned them from getting into the parliament. We were watching all the activists who were sometimes have some sympathy toward the Muslim Brotherhood. They were attacking them hardly, writing against them. So the activists still there. They are not politically organized, but they are activists. They are not party.
And that goes to the wall of, that fear that has gone now.
Exactly.
Lamis, I want to hear from you as well, because we're talking about the winners and losers. And in Bahrain, what's your answer to who's won and who's
won? We are all still losers now because we didn't win anything. We are only paying the price of uprising against such a brutal regime. But let me tell you something about this issue. I know that a lot of people have concerns about what will happen to those countries of Arab Springs. And a lot of those concerns are, I fully agree that we have to consider. But I'm not with the negative, vibes that comes with talking about it, because let's face it, we are. Let me give you a simple example. If someone goes to a coma for 40 years and wakes up, do you expect him to go running in the street? He will take a lot of time to recover. He will wake up, maybe, even he lost the words. He don't know how to talk. In a country like, he's one, but thank you. In a country like Bahrain, we've been having one prime minister, one corrupted government for 40 years. It's not different in Egypt or in Syria. And now that we get rid of them, we will have chaos. And now a lot of regimes want to say that, see what's happening on Egypt? Do you want the same? See what's happening on Libya? Do you want the same? And we say yes. Now we have... We have those regimes are a knife in our back, and we have to think now how to remove it. Right. And after that, we will think of healing, and we will do it.
And it's interesting because historically, I mean, and now the countries that are the best shining examples of democracy, I don't know, France or anywhere else, a revolution takes sometimes decades to mature into whatever. Sometimes you go back to the old repressive ways. Then you have another revolution. Then you have another set of protests. And why would it be different in the Arab world, Nick?
I mean, you can take the example of what happened when the Iron Curtain came down 20 years ago. The countries, Poland, Czechoslovakia, as it was, one country, they went through a process of different iterations of government, and the communists in some countries coming back into fashion again. But it took time, and it was a process. And now if you get everyone around the table, and the democratic principles that have brought these new eras to Egypt, to Tunisia, to Libya, as long as the leaders adhere to those democratic principles, we shouldn't fear the process. We should hope for the end result. I echo what you're saying.
Okay. We are going to, we've gone through these two themes, and flowing is quite naturally out of, I would say that one. But is the economy, because that is really possibly going to be one of the factors that determines how people react to the revolution, right? And Nick, I believe, is our, we chose a clip there from one of Nick's pieces from Syria on the economy. So let's take a look at that.
This mechanic tells me repairs have dried up. He can't pay the rent in his workshop, his house, or even feed his family. Like most here, he won't publicly criticize the president, but blames the old guard around him, says it's time for change. And it's not just the little guy that's hurting. This boss of a pharmaceutical company is keeping his 150 employees on, while he says others in his sector are laying off. Raw material imports tougher to find, lines of credit in short supply.
Well, this was just a few weeks back, wasn't it? I mean, and of course we've all heard stories in Ahid, I'm sure, as well, in Syria and in Egypt with the tourism sector suffering. I can't even imagine in Bahrain what the economy is going through. I mean, I suppose my question would be, I'll start with you, Professor Wickham. How important is how quickly the economy recovers to the course of the revolution?
It's absolutely vital. Those coming out to vote in huge numbers in Egypt and in other Arab countries, what is their number one priority? Their major concern is to get some relief from the profound economic distress that they have been in for many years. And if we look at the Egyptian economy today, it is in very dire shape. The foreign reserves are dwindling. Unemployment is at a 10-year high, unofficially estimated at 20%. The tourism is down, and an estimated 40% of Egyptians are living on $2 a day or less. And those in Parliament, including the Muslim Brotherhood, its dominant force, understand that they will be judged above all on how well they are able to do two things. One is to effect a smooth transfer of power from the military to a civilian government. But second, and just as important, to address the real-life economic, day-to-day hardships faced by Egyptians. And the Brotherhood, knowing this, also understands that it does not want to shoulder that burden alone, and that it cannot, no one group can address these intractable problems alone. And therefore, it is going to be under great pressure to not just establish cooperation with secular groups in Egypt and powerful actors, but also with international financial institutions and foreign governments like the United States, for which it will it will rely for support as it attempts to get the economy back on track.
And you mentioned 20%. I'm going to get to an audience question, but one of the interesting statistics is if you count unemployment plus underemployment, which is a huge problem in the Arab world, in a country like Egypt and Syria, you sometimes hit 50% of the working population, with most people under the age of 35. I want to get to Ray Donato, who is the Consul General to the Philippines and who's done a lot of travel and business in the Middle East. There you are, and please ask your question, sir.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'm quite grateful to be attending this Arab Spring Path to Democracy CNN dialogue. Being from the Philippines, we also had revolutions in there during the dictatorship of Ferdinand Marcos. So I have compassion to the people of the Middle East as to what's happening right now. But on a broader sense, I would like to ask a question to any of the panel members who might be able best to answer this question. The Middle East has done well as an oil-producing region. However, the opportunities doesn't seem to be trickling down to the masses. Is there, or would there be, an economic paradigm shift wherein the future will see an era of change from oil-producing countries to an era of manufacturing, technology, and other sorts of products that the Middle East could export? Automobiles, pharmaceuticals, instead of oil. So from an oil-producing country to a non-oil producing country, just like what Japan did after the war.
Yes, I will comment on this. Actually, it's a very, very important question, and I believe, yes, we are heading on the way of seeing a new form of economy, or some major economic changes in the way the Middle East is operating economically. Hala just mentioned that the majority of the people in the Middle East are under 35 years old, and somehow they understand very well that oil that is being owned by certain families all over the region is forming some kind of an obstacle in the way of having open relationships or trading internationally with the rest of the world, and having open market economy, which we believe very much as young people living in the region, at least in Egypt. Actually, we believe that is one of the main things that will lead us to the change we would like. That's why in Egypt now, actually, it's being encouraged on a very wide scale entrepreneurship. Not in the same style that has been applied during Mubarak time, like the government giving credit, micro grants to the people, or big grants to the people to make projects, and then those projects fail because the people are not prepared with proper skills and even the whole system doesn't have the proper mechanisms to help them grow and help their small projects to grow into bigger ones that can compete not only locally or regionally but also internationally. Now people are changing, and people are thinking of, especially thanks to the economic crisis, people are thinking of finding solutions like how to make new projects, especially in the IT field, which like most of the Egyptians are very familiar with, and accordingly this hopefully will lead to a new economic movement or revolution in the region.
And Lamis?
I will connect your question with your question, sir. There was a report that make the headlines in all our newspaper that there is a research saying that we lost $55 billion this year because of that was the cost of the Arab Spring. This is what we caused in lost in Arab Spring. And my immediate question was, did you make a research asking how much we lost every year because of corruption? Mm-hmm. We lost a lot, but no one counted it.
Right.
And now that we have revolution, struggling to take the corruption away from our path, we will change our economy. We are ignorant by purpose. They make us ignorant. They make us that kind of citizen who ask the government for help. We ask them to pay us everything, especially me coming from a Gulf oil country. Now we want to change that. We have to change that.
Yeah.
We are out of the world. Let me tell you how we feel. We feel like we are living in the 16th century. Yet we have very nice buildings, very nice cars, but we still ruled by the same values and system that was in the 16th century. And that's why you see that we don't care now how much we lost. We lost a lot. We will recover by this reform.
And just one last thing before we get to what's next. It's not just the economic hardship at home, it's also the fact that young, educated Arab men and women are leaving. In other words, that the young people who could contribute to economic growth in their country are studying, maybe some of them are studying here at Emory University, you know, Arab Americans or of Arab descent, because the opportunity doesn't exist in their country. Syria is a country I know well. You know, the young, educated people don't live in Syria, generally speaking.
Yeah, a lot of people fled the country because of the economical situation. But we have to know that when there is no free state, free regime, there is no free economy. We don't have free market economy. We don't have competition. In Syria, if you want to do any kind of project, business, let's say in communication, you'd have a bullet in your head because it's owned by the cousin of Assad. So you have a few people are controlling the market in the country. There is no free competition. There is no independent judicial system that if I have any trouble, so I would go to the court because the court is led by the government. So when you have no competition, you don't have any free market.
If you want to make a living and do well in a country like Syria, you either have to have friends in the regime or
connection
or leave.
Exactly.
Yeah?
Either you have a connection, your cousin or anyone in the army or something, then you're going to get the best job in the country.
Carrie?
I just wanted to add to that, to sort of highlight more generally the connection between democratic institution building and economic development. That economic corruption and mismanagement thrives in the shadows, and it has thrived under years of authoritarian rule. And if you want to encourage or you want to enhance the trust and confidence of Arab and foreign investors to invest in new industries and new technologies, you need transparency, you need public oversight, you need contracts that can be enforced in courts, you need rule of law. So all of those things which are valuable in and of themselves are also vital in order to get economic development moving forward.
Okay, so we're going to talk about what next, and for that I'm going to invite Dima El-Shufi. She is the Vice President of the Arab Cultural Association here at Emory University. She happens to be of Syrian descent. Where from Syria is your family?
They're from the south of Syria, Sueda, the Sueda region.
From where, sorry?
Sueda.
Sueda, okay. Go ahead with your question, please.
I'd just like to thank you all for coming very much. I think Emory is very lucky to have the CNN Dialogues here this year. My question is, well, we've come a long way from the beginnings of the Arab Spring, and I believe that the Syrian people are expectant and hopeful for a better future. However, what we've seen in Libya and Egypt is the destruction that also comes with revolution, be that through military intervention or the exposed conflict that's been dormant until now. So does the panel see something similar happening in Syria? And what is the best scenario that could happen?
Okay, and Nick, since you were in Syria just a few weeks ago, I mean, I know it's a difficult question to answer, but what is the best? We keep talking about the worst possible option, but what is the best possible option?
I think the best possible option would be that the opposition would find a coherent, cohesive, unified voice, despite the challenges of many of the opposition leadership being outside of the country, separated from the people on the ground who are getting more blooded and more angry and more desperate. If that unified voice can be found, if enough diplomatic pressure could be brought to bear on Russia and on China by the rest of the world to see the reality that even Russia is going to lose out because this desire to keep Assad or somebody close to Assad in power is not going to work out on the current track. To bring together a conversation around a table in Damascus with not representatives of Assad's regime. There's a suggestion the vice president really does not have any power, is really manipulated by the government, is hardly representative of where one would hope to see the country move in the future. But if you can get some dialogue going, this is the best. But the opportunity for that is being...
You mean between the regime and some members of the opposition?
You know, it's very hard to see it between the regime and the opposition, but we're talking about the best case.
Yeah.
And I have I've been talking about the worst case on TV all day, and it's very hard to get from where we are to the best case right now, but that is the best case. And I think it's probably an over-optimistic hope that we can get to that point. I mean, one of the things that President Assad has created on the ground here by this barrage and bombardment, he is knocking out of the ballpark, as you might say, the will to have a conversation with him or anyone that he might deem. How can you get people to support their leaders when their families are being killed? They're angry and they're desperate. So he's got to stop bombing and shelling, mortaring people. He's got to stop upping the ante, and you've got to unite the opposition, and you've got to find a figure that within the government structure that they can feel comfortable talking to. That's the best scenario I see, but I find right now that's very hard to imagine we could get to that point.
Yeah. I think now would be a good time if any of you have questions for the panelists to raise your hand, and I believe we have here we are here, sir. If you could give us your name and then ask your question, please.
Edward McNally. I'd be curious what effect the U.S. elections may be having on our role, this government's role in these various countries. And what I mean by that is you've got candidates and supporters of candidates going on television stating in some cases very hardline remarks. And we haven't even talked about Iran and how that might implicate how we respond to the situation in these countries. I know Iran is not Arab per se. And you also have this president trying to carry out his policies during an election year when everything is likely to be more criticized than usual. So I'm asking overall, what is the role of the U.S. right now, and how do you foresee that evolving in this election year?
Ahid, let me start with you. What should the role of the U.S. be in a country like Syria, do you think?
Get more serious toward what's happening in the country, not only verbal statement. As I mentioned, it's the worst scenario that we reach now. And we wish to have a peaceful transition in the country, but it's impossible now. So there is one way: supporting these rebels, supporting the defectors, supplying them with weapons. Otherwise, the country would be supported, these free army would be supported by Islamists, by Islamic countries that would really affect the whole region.
So you think the United States should supply weapons to the rebels?
The Free Syrian Army.
So let me ask you about Bahrain. What do you think the U.S. should do with Bahrain? It's a very important military ally.
Yeah. First of all, we would like them to stop selling weapons to our regime, because they are intending to do, and they did before. And I went there to Washington, D.C., telling them that why you want to sell all this weapon to our regime? They are not in any kind of war with any country. They are in war with us. They're going to use it against us. And let me tell you something about the American situation. The NGOs is fully supporting the Bahraini people. And we are very grateful to them. And the press, somehow, they are also. But the American administration, they tell it to us very clearly that we know it's hard for you, we know the human rights is being violated, but we have many levels of interest with the Bahraini regime. And I told them what I'm going to tell you now, that why you bet on a regime, on one guy or 10 guys? You have the people, you have to bet on the people. They are grabbing. I think they are giving them the kiss of life. They will not keep them forever. Yeah. Because if the people don't want them, they can't survive on their chairs. But instead of staying for 1 year, they will stay for 5 years with the support of the U.S.
Right. You just think it's deferring the same outcome, what's happening now, the support that the U.S. is giving the regime. Is that, I mean, more or less? Yes. But that the outcome will eventually be the same.
Of course.
Yeah. Okay, we have a question there.
My name is Nawa. I'm a student here at Emory. I have a question to Nick. So in relation to what Nick and Dave told before, one of the most relevant ongoing issue in today's world is in relation to the Arab world, the Arab Spring is the self-immolation going inside the China's occupied Tibet. Because in today, about few hours ago, there's self-immolation going inside Tibet, and till today, about 21 people have self-immolated themselves. And one of the reasons why these self-immolations are happening inside the occupied Tibet is because of the Arab Spring, the results of Arab Spring. So my question is, but the self-immolation going inside Tibet has not gained that much attention as other revolution, that is the protests going around the world. So my question is, what it takes for those self-immolations happening inside Tibet to gain more attention from the media?
So if I understand, you're asking what some of the revolutions who haven't had as much media attention, what they would, why that is, more or less, or...
Yeah, the self-immolation. People are burning themselves to protest against the government. For example, in Tibet, these people are putting fire on themselves because to protest against the Chinese government. So my question is, because in Time magazine in 2011, they said that the self-immolation going inside Tibet is the least attention paid by the news media around the world. So my question is, what it takes to the news media to get more attention on these issues happening inside Tibet?
Okay, yeah, I mean, and that's something we, in fact, just a few days ago, there was our colleague Ben Wiedemann was walking to the office and some guy set himself on fire. You know, it's become, I mean, it's not, he was fine, which is why we can, you know, in the end it was just a stunt, I think, to get the attention. But it's become this trend in the Arab world that's a little worrying, isn't it? I mean, it's become, we've heard it in Tunisia and more in Morocco and things like that. But I think that was his question. Is that a way to gain it, you know? I mean, about?
I think he was, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong here, I think you were saying, what does it take to get the media's attention? You have people immolating themselves, burning themselves in Tibet.
Okay,
and our focus
I'm sorry, I misunderstood. Yes, and it
does
does get the media's attention, clearly.
I know my colleague Stan Grant has been trying to get to where he can tell this story much better.
it's very tragic to say, but it is incidents like that where there are images or events that make us in the international community, not necessarily the media, realize that something desperate is going on and that something tragic is going on and that we need to pay attention. And it is a shame that people lose their lives in their desperate acts to draw international attention to these situations. That's what it takes. I mean, that's the attention that grew in Tunisia in the beginning. But I think we all need to remember when somebody does that to themselves, it is through desperation of realizing that their voice carries no weight, but their loss of life might.
Right. Okay, apologies, I understand. On the one hand, you're saying in Tibet, this happens too, and it gets less attention. Yeah. And why do you think that? I mean, let me ask you, or if you want to say something.
Yes, I would like also to add. Yes, that's very true. Media only pays attention to the tragic events and tragic accidents. But recently, we've been using a very powerful tool, which is social media, and this is actually helping very much in also attracting the traditional media and the international media into the work we have been doing. The story of Khalid Said, for example, the guy who has been killed by police forces in Egypt, and thanks to his tragic murder in the street by beating, the revolution has already happened. This story was not going to be on the headlines of the media until the young people started by tweeting about it and writing about it and making a Facebook page around it. So
let's just get to another. Yes?
Hey.
Ah, there you are. Go ahead.
Well, my question is for Dalia from Egypt. So I'm Egyptian, my name is Ali. So the question is, when you first started talking today, you said you didn't like the democracy happened, that the election happened. So I'm just wondering why it has to be a liberal democracy. Why democracy has to be liberal to be good? Why when the Islamists move, when it's uninformed choice? Why we have to fit in the model that, we have to, certain people has to win, otherwise the election is bad, or the election shouldn't count. Well, as you saw in the TV, it's actually, it's the first election ever. We have it in Egypt as a history. For the 7,000 years, we never have an election. This is a very fair election that people choose. People made the choice. Why we think it's not liberal enough? No, people are uninformed. Yes, they are maybe uninformed, but they made the choice. Why do we have to censor their choice? Why do you have to? No, it's not liberal enough.
If I understand your question, sorry, the voice is not that clear.
I will be transparent here. We're having a little bit of trouble making out some of the words, but you were asking why some people, did you?
You're asking that, let me repeat and tell me if this is correct, like it is the choice of the people and we have to respect it, not to call it liberal or to force them to go to the liberal direction or so, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Yes, actually I agree with you 100% that we have to respect the people. When we were talking about the winners and losers here, I was going to comment actually that the winners are the people who finally broke this barrier of fear and were able to have their voice heard either in elections or in the street or anywhere. I was so proud at that day when I was at the election seeing people with large numbers voting. But what I mean by liberal here, liberal democracy, is not the Western liberal form of a certain country that should be applied in Egypt. But liberalism is about certain things. First of all, about institutionalism, which means that the state will be based on institutions that will accordingly prevent any person from manipulating the power or practicing corruption. Second, a strong constitution that respects the representation of everyone in the country. Third, and most importantly, respecting civil rights and individual freedoms. And I would say these are values that everyone in the world agree on. We can call it liberal, we can call it, anything. We can give it any title. But I'm speaking about the value, not the name,
Well, but then when you first said that, okay, the Islamic dictatorship, and they just won the parliament less than 1 month ago. So we were both, we know that we all agree that Mubarak was a dictator. So why you are calling them a dictatorship?
I personally, actually, I see that it's absolutely wrong to mix between religion and politics for any reason whatsoever, because. Thank you. Thank you. That's because politics is, there are people who are qualified to practice politics, they should be there. And religious people, their place is the most. Let me tell you very quickly, I know, like an incident that happened yesterday in the parliament. In the parliament of the first free election that Egypt is witnessing in almost 7,000 years, one of the Salafi members who, the professor here was mentioning that they are from the most extreme groups. He stood up in the middle of the session, while the session was working, to announce the prayer and ask the people to go to prayer. So the head of the session commented and said, it's wrong, it's against the law, you should not be doing this inside the parliament. The next day, all Salafi stations and media are attacking the head of the session because he asked a member of parliament to respect the law.
Well, yes, because I want to get to some of the audience questions, but briefly, and of course, as anyone who knows Islam knows, you can delay your prayer, you can consolidate your prayers, you don't have to stand up and pray. So, yeah.
What's interesting is that the Speaker of Parliament, who said that, this is not reasonable, was a leader of the Muslim Brotherhood.
It was a Muslim Brotherhood.
Which is particularly interesting.
Well,
and I think it's important.
So he was sticking to the rule
of
the
saying,
assembly.
Islam is flexible. We can pray at a different time. This is not appropriate to disrupt the proceedings. Right. But I think it's very important to remember that dictatorships do not dissolve overnight. It is a long process. And when we talk about dictatorships, we're talking about state institutions in Egypt. The uprising decapitated the state apparatus, but many of the basic structures of that authoritarian state apparatus carried over from the Mubarak era remain intact. And it's going to be a long, difficult process to begin to reform them. And at the same time, it's a question of reforming the culture and creating a more inclusive and participatory culture that is respectful and tolerant of a wide array of views and opinions. And that too is a process that we cannot expect to occur overnight.
Right, and it takes time. Please, sir, your name, and then we'll get to you because sir, I know you've had your arm up there for a minute. Go ahead.
Habib Asta from a newspaper. This question to all the panelists. How do you foresee the Middle East a year from now or 5 years from now? And my second question is, what do you see the future of the minorities in your countries?
Let's talk about the future of the minorities. Syria is particularly interesting. A minority is ruling, the Alawi minority, but there are Christians, there are Druze, there are Shiites.
I think in Syria it's different than other Arabic countries in this regard. We don't have a homogeneous society. We don't have like overwhelming Sunni majority in Syria. There's like 65% Sunni. Even among the Sunni, not all of them are like the same. There's Arab Sunni, Kurd Sunni. So minorities in Syria themselves, they shape a big block that they can, I believe, protect themselves. And also you have the secular. Among the Sunni there are a lot of secular. Not all the Sunni are Islamist. I believe a lot of the women sitting here, they're wearing hijab, and they were like even against the Islamic people. So we have to know not all the Sunni, not all the Muslims are Islamic, and I think these people would stand for the right of minority. So no, I think the right of minority would be guaranteed in any democratic country.
And in Bahrain, the minority
is ruling.
Rules.
The minority there rules. But answering your question, if we have a proper democracy, we don't have to worry about what will happen to minorities. All the country, they have minority, the other democratic country, and no one is complaining. So you don't have to worry about that if we have the proper democracy.
And in Egypt, the Copts have been feeling a little, more than a little insecure.
Unfortunately, not only the Copts, we have other religious minorities like the Baha'is, for example. They have been persecuted even since the time of the former regime. So
I want to be able to get, because we want to make this as much of a dialogue as possible. Sir, you are in the 1, 2, 3, 4th row. Yes, please stand up, and we are bringing a microphone to you. There you go. Yes.
This is a question for Mr. Al-Hindi. What's the revolution in Syria doing to convince the minority that support the Alawite to join the revolution and assure them it's not really an Islamic revolution, but it's a Syrian revolution, just like it was in the 40s and 50s and early 60s, where Christians were prominent in the government as prime ministers and chief of police, and even the Armenian were chief of police in the 50s, General Harand.
And then here well goes the voice. What can we do to convince minorities?
The Alawis to...
Other than the Alawis.
Other minorities to join the... Yes, because the Christians have stayed on the sidelines. I mean, there's been some fear among and some Sunnis, there's been some fear among some of the minorities of what will replace the regime if it falls. Will it be the Islamists? Will it be even worse?
I think there is a little bit of exaggeration among the media that minorities are not participating. I myself, I'm not a Sunni. A lot of my friends were in the prison. There are Alawite. There are a lot of Alawite activists and dissidents who spent years in the prison. Druze, a lot of Druze. Yesterday, the city of Suwaida, which is Druze, a lot of people are protesting and demonstrating. I mean, what can guarantee the right of minorities is the state of law, when they're gonna feel that they are equal. And with this regime, I don't think, I mean, the regime was able to fool some of the uneducated people among the minorities, not the whole minority. So we are protecting you from the Sunni, but we have been living with the Sunni since decades. I mean, the Speaker of Parliament in Syria was Christian and was a Christian Protestant. The Protestants in Syria are minorities a minority among the Christian even, and was the Speaker of Parliament. So I think getting rid of these regimes is the thing that would make these minorities live securely in these countries.
And interestingly, today I read that some Alawis in Homs are now saying this is crazy. I mean, this is becoming a man. The Alawis you would expect. So yeah, so you have, and some of the most famous dissidents in Syria are Alawi.
I mean, Alawi and Christians. A lot of them spent years in the prison.
Michel Kilo.
And Orbani.
Okay, another question. Here we go, sir.
My name is Ali Migahed. I'm a PhD student, an Egyptian PhD student at Georgia Tech. And I have two questions for Carrie. The first is, what do you think the U.S. government would like to see in the new regime and government in Egypt, especially...
The new regime, what would the U.S. government like to see in the new regime and the new government in Egypt?
Especially on the short run, and especially with regards to the civil-military relationship. My second question is, what do you think the U.S. government has been doing throughout the whole previous year and right now in what's going on in Egypt? And I would like you, if you don't mind, to connect this to that recent conflict of these arrests for some Americans in the civil democracy organizations in Egypt that has been happening these days.
And the second part was about the prosecution of heads of NGOs, including U.S. NGOs, the NDI and the IRI, etc.
Well, it's interesting because the United States has both been accused of not lending enough support to the protesters and not putting enough pressure on the military to, cede power, and by the military itself for putting too much pressure and for interfering in, the sovereign affairs of an Arab state. And that's, the pretext that they have given, saying that NGOs operating in our country must abide by Egyptian law. This is a judicial matter, and who are you to tell us that we can't, prosecute, these individuals according to our laws? But it is, to me, perplexing that the military would make this an issue at a time when over $1 billion in military aid is up in the air, when the country is going to need the support of the United States in the military and economic domains to move to move forward economically, and particularly in light of the long strategic alliance between the Egyptian and U.S. militaries. So it's perplexing to me that
that they are making this into a cause célèbre. To me, the benefits do not outweigh the costs. As far as what the U.S. will do or should do, I mean, to me, those are open questions. But I would say, if I, had the ear of whatever new president is elected, I would say that, number one, the U.S. should do everything it can to get the Israelis and Palestinians back to the negotiating table to arrive at a settlement of the Israeli-Palestinian issue, because that unresolved not only is causing undue suffering, among Palestinians and lack of security for Israelis, but also is going to be a touch point for tremendous tension, or could become a tremendous touch point for tension between the newly elected governments in the Arab world and the United States. So that's, to me, number one priority. And at the same time, I think that we need to be very pragmatic in our relationship with newly elected governments. Their visions, their priorities may not always be the same as ours, but they were elected by their people. We need to work with, work within the art, with the politics is the art of the possible. Seek where we can areas of common ground. Help to, use our backdoor influence to convince, for example, the Egyptian military that, it should, cede power to civilian authorities. And, at the same time recognize that we're not necessarily going to agree with every policy. And that being said, I think we should use the pressure that we can bring to bear to encourage elected leaders to honor values that are important, to us, such as pluralism, tolerance of a wide array of opinions, and to remind elected leaders that democracy is more than majority rule. Democracy also entails basic respect for the rights of minorities, however that is defined, including the rights of individuals to dress differently or to have different opinions than those who were elected by a majority. And I think that's a very important point that we have to continue to stress.
So, Carrie, I just want to, because we pretty much have time for two more questions, and there's a gentleman there. I've seen you with your hand up for the last hour. I really want to get to him. He's wearing you two. There's like three or four of you clustered there, but the gentleman there with the light shirt, yes, with you. The white hair? With the salt and pepper hair.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Dimitri. Welcome. I would like to posit something to you, especially the people from the Arabic-speaking world, from countries of Syria and Bahrain and Egypt, that at least you have a nation-state from which to operate and to have your base for the struggle for democracy, for human rights, to end oppression, to end dictatorships, and to rebuild a shattered economy. This whole situation, however, exists still in one place, the only place in the entire region that has never been allowed to become a country. When does the Arab Spring come to Palestine?
When does the Arab Spring come to Palestine?
I think it's coming. It's coming to Palestine. As soon as all the dictators fall down, I'm sure Palestine will be the next issue to be handled. Actually, the Palestinian cause has been abused by dictatorships all over the region for so long to distract their people from the real problems that is going on inside their countries. So now we are removing the first obstacle. The next step is to help our brothers and sisters in Palestine to rise up and stand up for their rights. So hopefully it's coming soon. Don't worry.
Could you please tell us your name and then ask your question, please?
Hi, my name is Sara Abdelaziz. I have a question for the entire panel, but Sorry?
Sorry, what's your name?
My name's Sara Abdelaziz.
Okay, sorry, yes.
No, you're fine. But most specifically, Dalia, I was wondering, there's been two themes, I think, that are very apparent tonight in this discussion, and one is that these revolutions, this Arab Spring, is not over. And then another is, how can people continue to get that power to continue these revolutions? But it's been phrased in a way that how is it that the existing power structures, these existing governments, can secede power to the people? How can they ask for it and how can they get it? It seems as though that's not in line with the actual Arab Spring and the word revolution itself. And I think most specifically, I would know the situation in Egypt best, so I'm going to reference that. it doesn't seem at all in line with what the people came to Tahrir for. Labor, unions, students were organizing for years beforehand, having people recognize their power. That day in and of itself where people were supposed to turn up in Tahrir was actually a police brutality event. For Khaled Saeed, that was a murder. So I'm wondering how it is that we can get from that point to let's be in the parliament, let's recognize this institution as legitimate and partake in it, rather than this institution is still illegitimate because it's ruled by the SCAF, it's ruled by etc. So we must further break it down until it no longer exists and then create a new one.
Okay, so let me do you consider the parliament illegitimate? I mean, there was an election, these people, you know, I mean, it's just do you consider the parliament in Egypt illegitimate?
A question for me.
No, yes, I am asking you the question. I mean, because I think it's interesting if you do consider it illegitimate. Do you not like the result of the election, or do you consider
I do consider it illegitimate because I still see the SCAF ruling. I still see the same fascism that was happening before with Mubarak's rule continuing to happen, people getting shot in the streets for being in Tahrir. So it seems like the same things are happening.
Yes, you are right. I think Sarah wanted to say that we did not see a real change going on. But actually it's called an Arab Spring for a reason. Spring is only one season. Like, you know, now let's say we are in the summer of the Arab world, and you know the summer in the Arab world is horrible. So it's now we are in the tough time. But as we continue, as we have this persistence to reach again to this cycle of all the seasons, we will get again to the spring. Of course, it's very depressing to see that Supreme Council of Armed Forces is still ruling, still giving promises, unfulfilled promises, and things are going in, sometimes you feel they are not going in the right direction. But I assure you the determination of the young people, by the way, not only in Egypt. See, in Syria, for example, they have been standing up for a year or over a year now. In Bahrain, the same thing. In the rest of the Arab world. So young people, they are the hope. They are very determined to reach to the goal of making this region a real spring region. So, well, one day it will happen.
I want to, unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap it up here, but let me give everyone an opportunity to tell our audience what they think. I guess it's a bit cliche, but where do we go from here? Let me ask you that. Nick, you're off to, I don't know where tomorrow. The next revolution, that's actually a destination for him.
You know, I think as long as the leaders who've been elected with this new democracy respect the democracy, and the young activists who help them get there continue to be active and continue to be allowed to call for the changes and have their voices listened to by the new leaderships, and we all respect these new leaderships even though we may not like or understand their complexions, as long as that dynamic of democracy is allowed to continue and is not usurped by the leaderships, then this is a process that can continue and get to a better place for everyone.
Lamis, how do you see the future?
We are writing history here. We are reshaping our fact, our situation, our fact. It's not easy, and if you ask me, I know that we are going to hit the bottom just to, you know, so things will happen, will be better. We have all the faith. We have faith in ourselves, we have faith in what we stand for, and what we ask the audience here and everybody that will listen to us is to believe on us and support us, and never underestimate any word. You know, even if they write something on Twitter, Facebook, saying anything, don't underestimate it. You are giving us the power when we feel that there is someone in the other half of the world hearing us and caring about our struggle. Sometimes you can't help us in a very direct way, but even hearing us and talking about us meant a lot to us.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, actually, I'm very, very optimistic about the future, and I would say that we will ultimately reach to the free world we are dreaming of. What I'm asking, actually, everyone in this room and everyone will be watching us on TV, and I'm sure there are millions of people from all over the world, is that to understand that we all are universal citizens. We belong to the same human family, so we should all stand together for the human values of democracy and civil rights. As Lemise was saying, you should care about the people who live very far away from you, because one day this will affect you, either positively or negatively. So that's how I see the future. I see the future, people are getting more closer, and people are getting more interested in promoting human rights and civil rights values.
Professor Wickham?
I would say that I see the major breakthrough of the Arab Spring is that people have finally recognized their power. After decades of, silent resignation, as Dalia said, they were able to break through that culture of fear, and I don't think we can expect them to go back home and be silent again. The military and security establishments of Arab states are still strong, but they can no longer act with impunity the way that they did in the past. People have said if the SCAF refuses to relinquish power, we're going to be right back out at Tahrir, protesting. So it's created a new dynamic in the region. That being said, I think we have to be careful to manage our expectations, or we are bound to be disappointed by developments in the coming months and years. Processes of transition are difficult, protracted processes, especially with economic problems as severe as those facing Egypt and many other Arab states, and especially when there are such profound disagreements among different sectors of society about the direction the country should be headed. For example, on the crucial issue of what role religion should play in public affairs. There is no consensus. There's likely to be a lot of debate and conflict over those things, and we should expect that. With that in mind, my last point would be to be particularly sensitive and attuned to those who are marginalized in the new systems of power that are emerging. The women, minorities, those who do not have the backing of powerful institutions or the backing of large majorities. Let's be attuned to their needs and concerns and not forget them.
Let's remember 2% of the Egyptian parliament, women only. That's kind of a depressing. It's kind of a depressing statistic. Where do you see the future going?
Also so optimistic. I believe we made the first step into a journey of 1,000 miles. We have a lot of things to face, but now people start to believe in themselves. They're getting more confidence. They know that they can change if they want, even facing one of the most brutal regime in the world that we're ruling the Middle East. So that's it. I'm very optimistic, and I think we still have the way in front of us.
All right, well, thank you to all of our panel, Nick Robertson, Ahid El-Hindi, Professor Carrie Wickham, Dalia Ziada, and of course, Lemise Daif. Thank you. You've all traveled, many of you have traveled a very long way for this panel. And of course, thank you to all of you for coming this evening. It's just been fascinating talking about really witnessing history. I mean, we all are, and Nick and I have the privilege of reporting on it and hopefully bringing it to as many as people as possible. Thank you to the James Weldon Johnson Institute here at Emory University and Atlanta's National Center for Civil and Human Rights and CNN for these CNN Dialogues. And I have been asked to tell you about the next CNN Dialogues. That is going to happen in April. It's America's war against poverty. Of course, some people might say it is losing this war because the gap between rich and poor has widened. This happens on Wednesday, April 18th at 7 p.m. as well. Again, to our audience members, thank you, and to our panelists, many, many thanks. Thank you.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Emory University.